Japanese women. POWs were surprised when they showered with soap in America. They had heard the same warnings for years. The Americans will torture you, humiliate you, and dishonor Japanese women. But when they were captured, what shocked the Japanese female prisoners most was not the whip. It was a bar of white soap, scented with jasmine, handed to them by the rough hand of an American guard. Could the smell of American soap have shattered an entire empire of belief? What was it that made the enemy weep inside a prison camp? Or was this the most calculated act of psychological warfare in World War II? You're about to learn a truth history never told, a truth that will send chills down your spine. The only question is, do you have the courage to hear it until the end? But before we begin, if you want to hear more unbelievable, untold stories that history tried to bury, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment to let me know where you're watching from. Saipan, June 1945. The sun hung over the battlefield in a dull red haze, the color of dried blood. The air still carried the stench of gunpowder, burned flesh, and rusted iron from abandoned weapons. At the base of the mountain, among bomb craters and shattered bunkers, a small group of Japanese women were hiding. They were not listed in any army records, not recognized as prisoners of war, just lives swept up in the madness of the time. Soldiers' wives, nurses, cooks, and washerwomen for officers. They had lived for months in damp caves, eating moldy rice and drinking dirty water, surviving more than living. When the last cannon fell silent, they still did not dare to come out. In their minds, the war had never truly ended, because the warnings they had heard their whole lives, that the Americans are savages who will enslave Japanese women, dishonor them, and kill them without mercy, still echoed like a curse. So when the first footsteps sounded above, they backed away until their shoulders pressed against the cold stone, their eyes wide in the dark. One woman whispered hoarsely, "If they find us, we must end it ourselves. Do not let them touch you." Another nodded, her trembling hand clutching a dull kitchen knife. A man's voice called from above, "Anyone down there?" His tone was firm but not harsh. No one answered. Then came the sound of movement, and a flashlight beam swept through the darkness, catching pale faces, hollow eyes, and terror. One woman screamed, and suddenly chaos erupted. They burst out like trapped birds. Screams, cries, the clatter of knives striking helmets, footsteps in the smoky air. One woman threw boiling water toward a soldier's shadow. Another fell. The youngest, Keiko, stood frozen in the middle of it all, her mouth open, but no sound coming out. She didn't know whether to run or die where she stood. Everything she had been taught about honor and purity, about dying before disgrace, became meaningless when she saw an American soldier fall after being struck by a rock. Then a single gunshot cracked the air, a warning fired into the sky. The world went still. The women froze, the golden light of late afternoon turning their skin to stone. Smoke hung heavy, and then one American soldier stepped forward. He didn't raise his gun. He only said softly and slowly, "Stop. You're safe now." No one understood the words, but there was no threat in his voice. He removed his helmet and lowered his head slightly, a small gesture that changed everything. The soldiers behind him kept their rifles ready but did not fire. They moved closer, carefully, cautiously, like men approaching frightened, wounded animals. One woman screamed and tried to smash her head against the rocks, but two soldiers caught her just in time. She fought wildly, sobbing, crying out in broken Japanese, "Don't touch me! Kill me! Kill me before you shame me!" The soldier holding her didn't strike her. He only repeated the few Japanese words he knew, "Daijobu, daijobu." "It's okay, it's okay." The air froze. The sound of crying and heavy breathing filled the cave, turning chaos into one sound, raw, exhausted, and full of fear. Slowly, some of the women sank to the ground. They had no strength left to fight, no belief that death could save them. They were surrounded, not by violence, but by something stranger, the quiet eyes of men who had won but did not hate. As night fell, rain began to pour. The soldiers led them through the downpour across the muddy ground of Saipan. Rain washed the mud and dried blood from their clothes. Keiko felt someone take her arm, firm but gentle. She turned and saw a young black soldier handing her a blanket. He said something in English she didn't understand, but his eyes made her stop. In that moment, Keiko realized there was no mockery, no cruelty, only exhaustion and a compassion she didn't know how to name. When they reached the camp, the Americans brought water, bread, and medicine. Nurses checked their wounds. The women huddled together, their eyes wide like cornered animals. A doctor said, "They're malnourished. They need washing before anything else." The word washing, when translated into Japanese, hit them like thunder. Keiko froze. Suddenly there was noise again. The women screamed and cried, thinking washing was just a disguise for humiliation, the beginning of all the horrors they had been warned about. They shouted, threw things, tried to run. The soldiers restrained them, not with violence, but with strength. A lieutenant shouted above the chaos, his voice rough, "Calm down! Nobody's gonna hurt you!" They didn't understand the words, but the sound of his voice, steady and desperate, made some of them stop. The cries softened, the breathing slowed, and then there was only the rain on the metal roof. A nurse, Margaret O'Hara, stepped forward from the medical tent. She didn't speak. She lifted her hand. In it was a small white object, smooth and shining, a bar of soap. She rubbed it between her palms, creating white foam, the scent of flowers drifting through the air. Then she said slowly, "Soap. For you. Not punishment." No one moved. Keiko stared at the object, her heart tangled in confusion. Something so ordinary suddenly felt like the border between life and death. She looked at the others, soaked, trembling, covered in mud. For a second, she saw her mother in Tokyo, washing clothes under the sun, smiling at her, the scent of soap in the wind. The image flickered, then faded like a spark in the rain. She took one step forward. The camp fell silent. Margaret smiled and placed the soap in her hand. Keiko trembled as the rain mixed with her tears. The chaos ended. Not with weapons, not with orders, but with a simple gesture, a hand held out, and a bar of fragrant soap. By the time they were led to the washing area, the sky above Saipan was beginning to lighten. The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, falling like silver threads on the ground. Keiko held the soap tightly in her palm, its surface smooth and cold. She didn't know it yet, but that moment marked the border between two worlds, the darkness of war and the fragile light of humanity. And that was how it began, with the sound of rain, the rhythm of fearful breathing, and the first scent of soap spreading through the air. The collapse of hatred had quietly begun. The bathroom door opened with a soft creak that broke the stillness of the morning. A wave of warm air drifted out, curling into the damp breeze of Saipan's dawn. The scent of soap, light, sweet, and pure, spread through the air like something from another world. For those women, that scent felt almost unreal. It was too gentle, too precious, and it left them confused. Their lives had always smelled of smoke, sweat, blood, mud, and fear. Now a single bar of soap was enough to shake their entire world. Keiko was the first to step inside. She stopped at the doorway, her eyes scanning the white-tiled room. The rows of shining metal showers lined up neatly. Somewhere inside, the sound of dripping water echoed softly. The water was warm. There were no chains, no whips, no screams. Only the scent of soap and the golden morning light glinting on the wet floor. It felt like stepping into a place untouched by war, a corner of peace carved out of chaos. The other women lingered at the door, clutching their blankets tightly, eyes full of doubt, hands trembling. They feared it was all a trick, that behind this kindness hid humiliation. But the American nurse, Margaret, stood quietly nearby. She said nothing, only smiled and nodded gently. She placed a few new bars of soap on a wooden chair, then turned and walked out, leaving them alone. The door closed softly behind her. For a moment, the room was so silent they could hear their own hearts beating. Keiko took a deep breath. The scent rose around her, sweet, warm, unfamiliar, yet comforting. She rubbed the soap between her palms, and soft white foam appeared. She looked at it, amazed, as if seeing snow for the first time after the war. Then she touched the foam to her face. The cool, silky feeling spread across her skin, flowing through her body like a gentle wave. Without warning, tears began to fall. Not from pain, not from shame, but because she realized her body could still feel tenderness. For the first time in years, she did not hate herself. Her quiet sobs blended with the sound of water. Another woman reached out and turned a shower handle. Warm water cascaded down her skin, washing away months of dust, mud, and dried blood. The sounds of breathing, flowing water, and soft crying merged together. Then a second woman turned the handle. Then a third. Soon the room was filled with a strange, fragile music. Water falling, soap sliding, and tears that would not stop. Keiko lifted her head and watched the droplets break across her shoulders, light reflecting off them like threads of silver. Each drop fell to the floor, merging into a stream that carried away old blood, dirt, and ash. The war was being washed away with warm water and the scent of flowers. She touched her neck, where once there had been a dark bruise from the rope she had planned to use to end her life when captured. Now, that place was covered in white, fragrant foam. At the far end of the room, an old woman with tangled gray hair smiled faintly through her tears. "Before I die," she said in Japanese, her voice trembling, "I never thought I'd get to bathe again." Another woman answered softly, "No, maybe we haven't died after all." The room fell silent. They looked at one another, thin faces, hollow eyes, weary bodies, but in those eyes now shimmered something new. The light of life. The water kept running. The room was now filled with the scent of soap, the scent of purity, of memory, of something deeply human. A young woman looked up, smiling through her tears as she realized her hair was soft again, her skin smooth again. She turned the faucet stronger, letting the warm water flow over her face, as if she could wash away everything that had clung to her throughout the war. When they stepped out of the bath, afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtain, spreading a warm golden glow across the floor. Outside, on a table, were neatly folded sets of clean clothes. The fabric was soft, spotless, still carrying the scent of soap and flowers. Margaret stood nearby, smiling gently and gesturing for them to change. A few hesitated, but Keiko stepped forward and touched the fabric. It was cool against her fingers. She saw her name written in pencil on a small tag pinned to the shirt. Keiko, size S. She put the clothes on, feeling as though she was shedding an old skin, the skin of war. The new fabric brushed against her body, and she shivered. There was no smell of blood, no smoke, no fear, only the scent of soap, of sunlight, of something that caught in her throat, the scent of life. Margaret approached and handed her a small iron mirror, the kind American soldiers carried in their packs. Keiko held it up and saw her reflection: thin cheeks, swollen eyes, tangled hair, but in those eyes was something new, something quiet and peaceful.